Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I'm sure a lot of folks are joining from different parts of the world. We already are seeing a great number of people logging in. We'll probably give everybody a minute or so to join in, and then we will get started. Yeah, I think we should get started. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today for our webinar, which is on challenges in cloud migration and the need of assurance solutions. I'm Shubhendu. I head global marketing at Signity. We are the world's leading independent quality engineering and software testing services company. We help global enterprises accelerate their digital transformation by bringing in the power of artificial intelligence into agile and DevOps methodologies. Now, today's topic is very, very relevant for for all of us, QA and IT leaders worldwide. We are all facing overwhelming need for cloud adoption today. While many of us are aware of the benefits and risks of cloud adoption, we do run into challenges which could have been addressed by a more robust strategy to assure cloud migration. So to share some of the insights on this, we have an eminent panel today. We have Sean, who is the CIO and the CISO at Wiley. Sean is a visionary technology executive, and he's an author. He brings vast experience in DevOps, infrastructure, security, enterprise applications, and program management. He successfully drives global business strategy transformation, manages very large distributed teams to deliver business outcomes on time and on budget. Sean has taken enterprises from really dysfunctional models to mature, globally scalable, world-class organizations. Hey, Sean, welcome to the webinar.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Thank you, Sean. We have our second speaker. We have Raghu, who is our president and global head of delivery at Signity. Again, Raghu is a very highly experienced and senior IT leader who heads global delivery across all of Signity, across all of the regions, across all of our industry verticals. He brings tremendous experience and expertise in program management, test program management, digital transformation. We talk about test innovation, test strategy, assessment. Today, the overall Signity team, the large testing practice, large testing teams are all managed and led by Raghu. He's an influential speaker at multiple testing conferences globally, and including Test West, STC, and so on. Hey, Raghu, welcome to the webinar. Okay, so to all the attendees, I would just like to hand it over to Sean. But before that, if you have any questions for the speakers, please do find the chat panel on the right of your screen. You can share them there. We will cover them at the end of the webinar. And if you would like to reach out to the speakers, we can always do that post the webinar through email. And I would, without taking any further, doing any further delay, I would like to hand it over to Sean to take it forward. Over to you, Sean.
Great. Thank you very much. Great to be here today. Thanks, everybody, for joining. I'm Sean Mack, and I want to welcome you to Cloud Migration and Modernization Strategy at the Signity webinar on the challenges in cloud migration and the need for assurance solutions. Over 50% of the Fortune 500 companies from the year 2000 are now extinct. It means that just in 2 decades, more than half the brands that were on the Fortune 500 list simply no longer exists. And in many cases, the reason these companies no longer exist is a failure to transform, a failure to adapt to changing business conditions. Now, cloud enables us to move faster, to transform our companies, to meet whatever needs the market demands. The world's transforming, and our businesses need to transform too if we want to continue to succeed. I'm excited to be here today to talk a bit about cloud migration. I'll start with a bit of background about myself and Wiley, my company, and then I'll get into some of the keys to driving successful transformation. Then I'll get into more detail specifically around cloud migration strategy, how you pick the strategy that is right for you. And then I'll dive into a case study about how we at Wiley moved more than 700,000 students to our new cloud-based learning platform, all in time for back to school. And then finally, I'll close out with some next steps and where you can go in your transformation journey and your cloud migration. I hope you find this useful. There's a lot to cover, so let's get started. Now, I don't want to spend a ton of time on myself or on Wiley, but I did want to introduce myself to provide some background to what we're going to cover today. Now, while I introduce myself, I'd love to learn a little about you too. So I want to start with a polling question, and I'd love to understand your role in your organization. So while I'm talking through and providing a little bit of detail, please take a moment to fill out the polling question we have here. So as I said, I'm Sean. I'm the CIO and CISO at Wiley. I've led global teams across a wide range of companies, from large financial companies like Experian to innovative tech companies like Etsy. I've been with Wiley for just over 2 years now. I was actually brought in part to help drive transformation. And among the many transformations that Wiley is going through, one of the key is our cloud transformation. I'm glad to be here today to share a bit about that journey. Well, Wiley is a global leader in research and education. Our mission is to unlock human potential by enabling discovering, powering education, and shaping workforces. We have a very diverse technology portfolio with many legacy systems as well as modern containerized cloud-native applications with microservice-based architecture. We develop and maintain more than 500 applications in production hosted in various cloud platforms, including AWS, Azure, Google, and in our data centers. Now, Wiley has 3 main pillars of impact: enabling discovery, powering education, and shaping workforces. It's important to note this because all of these are transforming. In fact, Wiley is transforming it at every level. Our businesses are fundamentally changing, and so too must the underlying technology. One of the biggest transformations for us is our migration to cloud. And crises like the COVID-19 pandemic have only accelerated this transformation. Now, Wiley has been on a journey of transformation together since well before COVID-19. As I said, I've been here just over 2 years, and when I started, so this is prior to COVID-19, our CEO, Brian Napack, said that we're not in a single market that's not going through major disruption. And he's right. If you look at everything from research and the move to open access to research, and education and the move to online education, to publishing, these are all going through massive transformation. And these transformations are only accelerated by crises like COVID-19. Now, I'll also just say that Wiley is a company that's been around for only over 200 years, and we've only been around for that long because of our ability to continue to transform. And the fact that over 80% of our revenue is generated from digital products and tech-enabled service, and that this continues to grow, is a testament to that transformation from publisher to digital disruptor. So let me tell you a little bit about what I've learned both at Wiley and in my other roles. Before I was at Wiley, I led XOps. XOps was a global consulting firm which helped other companies go through transformation, specifically focused on DevOps and the cloud. And I learned a lot about what makes a successful transformation and where some of the key pitfalls are. And I want to dig in a bit deeper to how we can successfully drive transformation. One of the keys to a successful cloud transformation is understanding the why. You need to start there. You need to start by understanding why you're doing your cloud transformation. Because if you don't understand why you're doing it, you're not going to be successful at achieving your goals. Another key to success is starting small and finding early wins. And in finding teams that are ready and eager to adopt cloud, ready and eager to make that change, you find teams that also can be exemplars for other teams that want to follow on their heels. I also think it's critical with cloud transformation or any transformation to focus on the cultural aspects of that transformation. Because in many times the technology is, I won't say easy, but it's easier often than the people, than fundamentally changing how you work. So it's important to not forget that you're changing how people work and the culture of an organization when you're going through these technology changes. It's also important to measure your progress. And this goes back to my first point, the understanding why, right? You need to understand why you're making the change and then how you measure that goal. And make sure that you're measuring progress as you go along towards that goal. And pivot and be ready to pivot and change if you're not progressing in the right direction. And the final piece, I'd say, for transformation success is to make sure you're communicating. Right? Understand who your stakeholders are. Understand who the people are who are making this change happen, and continue to communicate. I know myself included, but many of us technologists are great at technology and not so great at communication. We need to make sure we're thinking about that as we go through transformation, because we need the whole team to come along with us. Now, on the other side, I've, in my consulting role, I've also seen implementations that haven't failed. And I want to share some of the things to look out for as you go through your cloud transformation that can lead to failed cloud transformation. One of the main ones is cultural inertia, a lack of willingness to actually fundamentally change. We need the people who are making this change happen to be excited and engaged about driving to the cloud. We need people who are making this change to understand that they have the opportunity to change and be part of what's next. I've also seen implementations fail because of a lack of support from the top or changes in leadership or direction, right? So you need to make sure that you have support from your executive leadership and that is sustained support. At the same time, you need also support from the key engineers and participants who are going to drive that change. Because if you don't have that, just a little reticence, a little dragging of the feet can significantly hamper the migration to cloud. The other thing I've really seen in terms of failed transformations to the cloud is trying to do too much at once. All too many transformations try and do everything once. They try and do everything and manage to do little or nothing. And, the final thing that I'll say is a cause for focus is the failure. And this is corollary to our need to communicate and focus on culture, but failure to focus on cultural transformation and a failure to communicate that transformation and communicate and get buy-in from your entire team. You can't buy a team to make, or buy a tool to make your transformation a success. You need to drive it through the people of an organization. Now, I want to get into a bit more detail specifically about cloud migration. But before I do, I'd love to understand a bit more about you and where you are on your migration journey. So while we do that, I'd like to ask for the second polling question, if you could pull that up, please. I'd like to know where you are on your cloud transformation. Are you just getting started? Are you midway through? Are you fully migrated and working on optimizing? Or are you cloud native? Did you go cloud first? Did you have the opportunity to drive a greenfield approach? While you're filling that out, I'll talk a little bit about how you drive cloud transformation. So one of the first things that I say is begin with the end in mind. This is a quote from Stephen Covey, the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And it's really important. This goes back to my question about, or my point about understanding why. Understand where you're trying to get before you try to get there. I'll also mention that when we're thinking about our strategy and where we're going, that there's a prevalent myth that cloud is necessarily less expensive. What I've found is that's not always true. And so if you're migrating simply to save costs, you might actually look at how you can optimize your costs in your existing infrastructure. I mean, at Wiley, we're migrating to drive added agility, adaptability, and empowerment. And I think that if you fully take advantage of the cloud, there are cost savings opportunities, but I would not start there. I'd start with the many other reasons to get to cloud. So as we begin to build out our cloud strategy, we need to look at several factors when determining the correct strategy for you. One of these would be your platform, both your current and desired state, right? Are you working on a legacy technology that you want to get off of? Are you working on the latest and greatest and want to stick with it? Do you want to centralize on your technology stack? So technology stack is another one of these things that you need to look at, both your current and your proposed. Another thing that's important to look at as you begin to build your cloud migration strategy is the move groups. That is, what is the interdependencies between your applications? Do you have a centralized user management system that's shared across several different applications? Or is each application and service you have in your data center isolated and able to move on its own? And finally, make sure you understand your budgetary constraints. Do you have short-term constraints? Do you have long-term constraints? And how, because this will shape how you develop your cloud migration strategy. Once you've got that information, you can start to look at what Amazon refers to as the R factors. What are your migration paths? And they define 6. I've now heard 7, but I'm gonna stick with 6 for now. 6 different R factors or migration patterns, right? Things like rehosting, which is also known as lift and shift, where you simply take what you have and port it to the cloud. There's also replatforming. So this can be thought of as lift and tinker and shift, where you might make a few optimizations in order to achieve some benefits, but more or less the architecture for your application is going to stay the same. Then there's also repurchasing, where you're moving to a different product altogether. So for example, if you've got a in-house HR system and you want to move to something out of the box like a Workday that's a SaaS-based system, or you're currently working on Salesforce in your data center, but you want to move to Salesforce in the cloud, right? So these would be examples of repurchasing. And then there's refactoring or architecturing, where you fundamentally reimagine how the application is architected and developed and re-architect it to really take advantage of cloud native features and functionality. And, this can be very beneficial where you have legacy architecture that you want to move out of. Now, one of my favorites, of course, is retire. Being a company with a large number of applications, it's always good to simplify and drive reduction. So if there are applications and services that you have that you no longer need, you can certainly retire as one, and retain is also an option, which usually means revisit at a later date or do nothing for now. If you've got a product which is already on a deprecation path, or is best suited for hosting in the data center. Now, based on your R factor, based on your applications and platforms, and that analysis you do, you will determine your migration path. And each one of those, this is, again, the migration path is defined by AWS, right? But it's very similar, whatever cloud platform you're going to. You'll determine the migration path that's right for you. And you'll see, you know, some of these are very simple, retain or retire, right? Obviously, very simple migration paths. But if you're doing a refactor or re-architect, it's a much more complex process. But the results at the end can be much more beneficial. Now, the key here, and this is a point that I think Raghu will hit on when he goes to his presentation, but the key and the point where all these paths come together, and one of the most critical steps is validation. Speaking of validation, speaking of migration, I want to get into one example of how we at Wiley move more than 700,000 students from our data center to our cloud platform, all in time for the start of school. Now, I'll say that the failure to transform can lead to failure, but change is risky too. The risk we face with cloud migration is that we need to transform while we're already delivering. This is really akin to changing the tires on a car while it's already in motion. It's not an easy task. And it's something that you can only accomplish if you're all working together as a team. But you better be sure those tires are on right before you put all the wheels back on the road. One of the great examples of this sort of migration was the migration of our biggest e-learning platform, Wiley Plus. Wiley Plus has over 25,000 instructors and over 700,000 students. And we needed to migrate with no back time and do that in time for back to school. And this is a platform that's been going through massive growth, which is only accelerated as thousands of students moved to online learning during COVID-19. So what are some of the keys we did to ensure that when we got back on the road, those wheels, those tires would stay on? Well, we focused extensively on test automation with our quality engineers developing and building test automation rather than just doing manual testing. We did a ton of functional testing, but even more so because we were looking at a cloud migration and a migration of the underlying platform, we focused on performance testing. We looked at key user journeys in enrollment, course setup, assignments, and assessments or tests. And we mapped those all out and ran significant load. In fact, we looked at our load projections, which were already high, and we ran 4 times that projected load. The other thing we did was integrated security testing. As security, maintainability, scalability is very important for us at Wiley. And so we built that into our automated testing. So it isn't something that's tested at the end after you're done, right? We wanted to be sure that our new platform was secure, stable, and maintainable. Another key component of the successful migration was ensuring that the performance of the platform was there and that the maintainability was there. And to that extent, we focused heavily on how we were going to monitor. Now, we take a DevOps-focused approach with SREs embedded on each application team. And we make sure that teams are empowered to manage their own systems in cloud, that teams are accountable for the availability and performance of their own systems. And to that end, we developed monitoring for each system and subsystem. We also integrated alerting tools like Big Panda and then PagerDuty, so that when issues did occur, we had our top engineers responding if there were any problems. And the results were phenomenal. We eliminated over 250 virtual machines in our data centers. We had no production incidents in launch, and we had no in production incidents during back to school on our core application. Those incidents that we did see were on auxiliary or related applications. And while there was a volume of customer support calls, as they always are during back to school, the calls were focused primarily on product usage as we had added new features, not on product issues. So I want to pass on a few key learnings of this migration. One is test for resiliency. It's no longer enough just to ensure that it works, just to ensure that it's functional. We need to assume that components will fail and test for resilience in the face of those failures. And you want to also make sure that those components are isolated and test for failure of those components, and that when those components fail, you have graceful degradation. And this gets into third parties that you may depend on, right? Because they may fail outside of your best efforts to test performance and functionality. And make sure that if and when that happens, you can still perform. And you also want to manage those third-party dependencies. Look at third-party SLAs and support contracts to ensure that the other systems that you depend on are there when you need them, that the support is there when you need it. And then optimize for independence. Make sure that shared elements are architected to allow for independent operations so that you don't have systems like monitoring or logging that are shared by multiple systems that a failure of which will require additional outside help. And this goes to my last point here, which is empower your engineers through ownership. Make sure that your engineers have ownership of the full environment, right? So that when a problem occurs, they can feel empowered to resolve it. So we talked about the elements of a successful transformation and some of the pitfalls when those fail. So where do we go from here? I want to leave you with a few thoughts. First of all, let's look at the roadmap for transformation. You want to start by defining your strategy, understanding the why you're taking these steps. Then you want to assess, understand your environment, define your desired state. Where do you want to get to? Based on that, you develop your plan, you select your application move groups, and you select your target destinations. And then you want to prepare your cloud landing zones and develop readiness guidelines. And finally, you want to migrate. Once you've migrated, don't forget that you're going to need to put some governance in place. And this is where the ongoing work takes place. You need to continue to optimize. You need to continue to focus on cloud, and particularly the cost management of cloud, making sure that you're always optimizing and driving the best cost management you can. In order to lead transformational, we must all be transformational. We need to fundamentally shift how we approach things if we're to be transformational engineers, transformational leaders. We need to shift from being operational managers to strategic drivers. We need to shift from looking at simply controlling costs to drive value. Look at the value this cloud migration can bring beyond cost. We can't be satisfied to just save money. We can't be satisfied to just have fewer defects. We need to also deliver value to our customers and our stakeholders. And we need to move from run to transform. I encourage all of you to be change agents, to be cultural revolutionaries. Look, I don't have a crystal ball, but what I can tell you is that the world's transforming and we must too. Now, more than ever, we're all technology companies. And our businesses must be agile and able to adapt to rapidly changing market transitions. And finally, transformation, continued improvement, the drive to cloud needs to be how we work every day. Thank you very, very much for joining me today. I hope this was useful for you. I hope it was enjoyable and you got something out of it. If I encourage you to connect with me, you can find me on LinkedIn at Sean D. Mac NYC. And I encourage you to continue the discussion on Twitter, where you can find me at Sean D. Mac NYC. Thank you again, and I will now turn it over to Raghu. Raghu, the stage is yours.
Hey, thank you, Sean. That was a great framework that you outlined for all of us today. Give me a moment. I'll share my screen and switch on my video. Is my screen visible?
Yes.
Okay, great. So, Sean, some interesting nuggets of wisdom that you shared with all of us. And I just want to tell the quorum that as a run-up while we were preparing for this presentation, I was commenting to the picture that Sean showed on the screen, the angular car, for lack of a better word, which was still running on the road, and we had to change the tires. And I had jokingly asked him, if the guys who were fitting the tires were the build guys, you need more guys on the car to even test it, right? So it's just not easy. And transformation on the run is a very, very tricky task. So that said, all of us know that there are a lot of big service providers, cloud service providers in the industry, hallmark names that we know of, right? Azure, AWS, Salesforce, Google Cloud, etc. But I just wanted you guys to look at some of the business disruptions that have happened due to improper migration or maintenance of the cloud platforms. Going back to where Sean told the story of understand the need for transformation, understand what to do when, and then follow it through, test at each stage, irrespective of all the frameworks that exist, irrespective of testing that happens or seemingly happens. We have what you see on the screen, right? There have been so many disruptions. Of course, I didn't get to the latest and greatest, including the Facebook fiasco that recently happened, but everywhere you see big names, and each of them, if you can spend just rolling your eyes over the remarks under each of those failures, you will see that there is some component of migration or maintenance in the cloud platform that has failed, because of which there has been a significant impact. Like the business case for testing generally that we all know, we also understand that the business case for testing in case of cloud maintenance and migration is similar, if not same, right? There is a huge revenue impact. There is a huge brand image impact. There is sometimes compliance and regulatory penalties that get slapped, not to mention of the opportunity cost that is lost, the user base that gets eroded, the diarrhea of feedback that comes into the social channels, lots of stuff, right? And Sean spoke about moving Wiley's 700,000 plus users into cloud while transformation. Just imagine if anything could have gone wrong, so much would have impacted the brand. So I'm sure all of us understand that need for ensuring that the business continuity and the business transformation, because of the underlying technology transformation, happens seamlessly. And all of these have presented their own learnings, including testing for components, including testing for systems which are built out of components, including ensuring proper maintenance checks are done after a cloud migration has happened. So at least our starting point is that, yeah, a lot of businesses are moving to cloud because of speed advantage, because of cost advantage, because of flexibility advantage, and blah. But at the end of the day, the impact that they had on an on-prem system in terms of disruption is magnified in the case of cloud, because now you have a complex array of systems that are open out into the world, right? So therefore, it's important for us to understand what are some of the underlying challenges that happen during a cloud migration phase. Before we get on to that, one thing we have to understand is as we move from on-prem to cloud, while that movement not only happens purely for technology need and cost need and flexibility, it also happens because of the business need, some business goals that need to be achieved in terms of the user experience that we need to generate, the amount of change that we need to inject into the software in runtime, all of those. So while the business goals are the end points that we need to achieve in an end state of cloud, the technology risks also get transferred. So let us look at the top 5 challenges in any typical cloud migration journey, right? As you see, this was a survey conducted by Cloud Endure, and this was done across thousands of enterprises where some form of cloud migration has happened. And as you would recollect, Sean had done a poll quickly to collect such type of nuggets, right? So similarly, a survey was done for thousands of enterprises. Now, if you see broadly, the challenges have been bucketed into 5 categories. One, there is downtime, of course, the data loss, regulation, which is the third block, visibility and control as to what is happening after you migrate to a cloud's environment, or while you are migrating to a cloud environment, and of course, understanding the technical feasibility. These are the 5-point failures typically because of which cloud migrations suffer. And one of the reports I was going through, it says 60% of cloud migrations have either stalled or reversed or failed. Almost like what we hear in the world of digital transformation sometimes. So there is a serious reason why 6 out of 10 cloud migrations fail, and we need to know the underlying reasons. Before we get into that, just sort of dovetailing again into what Sean showed us at the beginning, he spoke about something called as move groups, right? Move groups in applications. You should know which of these applications are isolated and can move, which of these have got interdependencies and they have to move together. So it's very, very important to understand what those move groups are. And we also saw the R factor, right? 6 or 7, the jury can be pending, but at the end of the day, there are different ways in which the cloud migration strategies are working. And at an enterprise level, it's very important to understand which R factor is picked up. And sometimes you might have a hybrid R factor, right? So parts of that is re-architected, parts of the application landscape is just lifted and shifted. There is complication around which R factor or factors have been chosen. So basically, what's your R strategy? Second, what are your move groups? And then you sort of If you recollect the slide where he showed the migration paths, then almost imagine them as waypoints in the path from point A to point B, and you should draw them out much ahead of the cloud migration execution itself. So basically, determining all of those is extremely important, and therefore there are 5 challenge focus areas that you see on the slide that are important for people to be considered. Especially downtime is a no-no once you move to cloud, right? So people expect 99% of availability, but if you see, downtime has been the major challenge. So during the course of migration or after migration, the downtime has contributed to a significant amount of failure of cloud migrations. And this could be because your services that you have developed are not up and running, you have your systems broken because components don't talk to each other, and therefore the overall reliability of the system significantly comes down. Now, while components are still at the application level, you also have a challenge on the infra level, right? So just a snap of network could also lead to issues. And it's almost like, I don't know how many of you guys have done the database migrations of the Yester RDBMS databases, or even if you are shifting artifacts from one database to the other, your migration process needs to run, and if it has failed in between, then you need a gracious exit or a last save point to which you can go back and continue that migration. So disruptions during live migration also have contributed significantly to the downtime factor. Data, I think, is a no-brainer again. Again, wherever there are systems which have legacy databases, there is data stored in almost tapes and disparate data structures, unstructured data in different sources. Ability to envisage all of that and ensure that your end state data has to look the same way or similar to what your starting state of data was, at least in terms of its accuracy and integrity. And of course, cyber attacks are akin now to the world. So data centers going down is going to be a big issue. So that's the next significant failure for cloud transformations. Security and compliance, again, from a compliance standpoint, if you are in the healthcare industry, if you are in the banking industry, if you are in the insurance industry, especially with open banking coming up, APIs, again, the way they transact data, the structure in which they exchange information, contractual breaches that they can cause if the data packets are not sent in the right manner. Sometimes misconfigured servers. I mean, we think some of these are hygiene, but if you recollect my previous slide, some of the major breaches that have happened because of that, including the latest Facebook fiasco, where a misconfiguration led to a significant showdown of the entire social media channel, right? Of course, visibility and control. Visibility and control, again, is a function of how are you able to monitor things, how are you able to monitor how parts of your system have moved from one point to the other, how they have moved collectively, your application monitoring systems, how you are able to have your enterprise-wide dashboards to ensure that you get the health of the systems, you get the understanding of how the systems are behaving live in production. Lack of these systems while you are doing data migration and after doing data migration is the next biggest cause of failure, because if you don't have a view of what's happening in the migration and post-migration, very likely the failures will not be visible. And that's the reason why it gets to the 4th category. And last but not the least, technical feasibility. Again, especially when you are re-architecting your software platform, when you are ensuring that You are specifically re-platforming from legacy to modern. Lot of re-architecturing happens. So unless you have assessed the technical feasibility of what is the current state and what is going to be my end state, and if you are going to figure that out during the migration journey, things are bound to fail. So with these 5 focus areas, at least in terms of where the likelihood failures can happen, and the framework that Sean also showed us in terms of how a migration or a transformation has to be thought. Let's also understand what is the need for assurance. So by now, I think at least all of us agree that assurance is even more critical than it was otherwise. And think about this. Maybe 10, 15, 20 years back, if an enterprise had complex application landscape mix, the end market users were potentially users of a website, at best on some commonly found 3 or 4 device makes across the world. So you have all enterprise landscape and you have the end user device landscape, which is also not very complicated. And things used to fail then, assurance was very important, etc., etc. And now we are talking about the end part of the consumer device that is exploding. You have devices, you have operating systems, that whole landscape itself is so complex. And then you have this enterprise landscape, which is again extremely complex. And you're moving that all of it into the cloud, thinking that the velocity of your software releases, the cost of your software releases, the experience of your software releases is going to be extremely high. No-brainer it is that assurance needs to be more diligently done, needs to be more stringently done, and needs to be continuously done as you move from on-prem to cloud in this whole cloud migration journey. So what are some of the things that we need to take care in this regard? There are 3 categories, as you see, mainly infrastructure, data, and application. These are the 3 nuggets in which all the assurance needs to be focused. But at the bottom of the screen is where you see the focus areas of what assurance should focus on. First, you should clearly get your tooling and methods right. Most of you would have gone through some DevOps experience or knowledge in some form and shape. We have this famous periodic table of DevOps listed with hundreds of tools, right? So which tool and which method of implementation of the tool and assurance of that tool is put into practice is extremely important. So tools and methods, whether you use some diagnostic tools, whether you do some monitoring tools, whether you use some validation tools, data validation tools, all the tools that you will have to use and the methods that you will use on those tools to ensure the assurance is covered 100% is one focus area. The second focus area is if it is an on-prem solution and you are upgrading your on-prem solution, it's all in your control because your IT department in an enterprise takes control of upgrading it, ensuring that the enterprise users are not having any disruptions and stuff like that. But here you have another party in the mix, and that is the CSP. And CSP have their own SLAs. The cloud service provider comes with his own charter of what he brings to the table, what OLAs he expects out of us and stuff like that. So if you take both enterprise and CSP mix, we have to understand that it is not completely a singular control. It is a shared responsibility model. So if your cloud service provider is saying that I will give you 99% availability, 95% guarantee on performance, 98% guarantee on security, and blah, that is good. That's the end state. But while you're migrating, you will have to run mock scenarios, mock production environments, take samples of the data, ensure that the CSP guarantees are what are seen during migration as well. And you have to set up joint health system checks. It's not left to the CSP completely, so that has to be part of your migration activity and strategy, because once your systems are down, you can blame it on CSP and make a whole deal out of it, but that doesn't matter. Your users would have gone. So it's very important to think about migration as not a complete control thing, but as a shared responsibility model with the end state of delivery in mind. So that's very important. The third is your test strategy, specifically if you have compliance and regulatory standards. You cannot compromise on that. You have GDPR, you have open banking regulations, you have your conventional SOX compliance and other compliances. And different countries of the world have got different regulations imposed in different ways. It's very, very important to have a test strategy for compliance and regulatory standards as part of your migration mix. The impact analysis, which is the next big thing, you should know what is the change that is happening in your application network level, application data and infrastructure level, and be able to extrapolate that. Even if it is a case of retiring applications, sometimes retiring of applications from an overarching system can lead to a disruption because some of the data might be passing on to some downstream application. And model testing environments. You model your testing environments closer to production. And guys, modeling your test environments closer to production in a cloud environment is just not easy. The most important and critical thing is determining your Nfrs. Forget about even your cloud environment, your regular applications. 90% of consumers and 90% of enterprise product managers or product requirement developers cannot articulate what Nfrs are needed downstream upfront. So this is very important, because if you recollect the first slide that I've shown, most of the failures are because of Nfrs, availability, performance, security, resilience, and stuff like that. Most of the time, the tendency is to focus only on the functionality of the application, but it's very, very important to understand what those Nfrs are. So these 6 are the focus areas that, as assurance, you should bring to the table in your cloud migration value chain. And here is a view of different testing types based on migration strategy. And migration strategy could be any of those R factors that Sean also spoke and I remarked. So we took 4 key R factor strategy and took a list of testing types and pulled out what is high, medium, low at each intersection. And if it's again a common sense, when you're re-architecting the entire platform, most of the tests are high priority because it's complete change. When you're refactoring, which Sean also spoke about, it is lift, tinker, and shift. So the tinkering will lead to high amount of tests that need to be done. Of course, lesser when compared to re-architecting. Lift and shift is the least disruptive way, but of course, baselining of as is and security, especially because your host environment is changing, assumes the highest priority. So this is to give you guys a view of, based on your R factor, and of course we will have to take into account the move groups, etc. We will have to design the low, medium, high tests, apart from the 6 focus areas that I spoke about in the previous slide. Last but not the least, we just wanted to share something that we did for a retail bank. It was an app-only bank, and there we were moving from an IFS on-prem solution of a core banking platform to a GCP core banking, ThoughtWorks core banking platform on GCP. And through the cloud migration strategy, we set up dedicated teams to do DevOps, migration testing, functional testing, non-functional, and jotted down our waypoints, ensured that we followed the cadence. And as these services were coming up and running on the GCP platform, tested them upfront, baselined it against what the current application in the IFS platform is delivering as in terms of baselines, and slowly migrated the data. And it was very important because it had GDPR compliance, and because it is banking, I can't have an account number going wrong. Some interest calculation of previous year's deposit on the previous core banking platform should reflect the same in the new banking platform. So we went down to the point of drawing out the cloud migration impact analysis to be done, set up the teams to focus on each of the focus areas that I outlined in the previous slide, and ensured that we did it in the most automated way possible. We had 95% of test coverage for that, and our test execution cycle time was reduced by 60% in the CI/CD pipeline, and we had less than 2% defect leakage, so much so that that application today is rated 5 on 5 as far as the cloud migration strategy is concerned. So a lot of learnings that we need to go down to the last mile. And I like the way Sean said, technology is easy. Technology is not easy, but it is easier than people. I think it's the teams, practices, tools, and methods that have to come together more than worry about the underlying technology. With that, I'll give a pause to my presentation, and Subhendu and team, we're open up for questions.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Raghu, for a great presentation. And thank you so much, Sean, as well. There have been a lot of questions from the audience. I'm not sure we will have time to, cover all of them, but just because we have 2 minutes, we can probably take one, which is kind of interesting. How should the question is from Kanika Goyal? How should continuous testing be achieved as I have all the product apps on cloud native? So that's the question. And then there is a follow-on question as well, which says, how should continuous testing be achieved as that's one? And then what do you suggest for these tools, monitoring, data analysis, or profiling? So if you could touch upon these, probably we could have that. And then rest other questions we can have over email. And yeah.
Sure, I'll jump in and start, and then Raghu, please add on, and would love to get your knowledge, learn from your knowledge here. But first of all, great questions. Thanks everybody for engaging with us here. I'd say in terms of continuous testing, for us, we look at it as part of our CI/CD pipeline. So it's a matter of integrating the test automation into your deployment pipeline, so that every time you deploy, you're deploying something that's well tested. And so then if you have continuous integration, continuous deployment, that means you've got fully automated testing as part of that deployment pipeline. So really that's part of our DevOps approach at Wiley, and how we ensure that every release is of great quality. I'll say, I mean, the question on tooling is probably too complicated to cover in the next 30 seconds. And it's really going to depend vastly on the maturity and size of your organization. I've worked with some customers, some companies where they had one monitoring tool and one test tool, right? I've worked with other much larger organizations where they had, 20 or 30. The combination, the tools, it's going to depend on your technology, the size and maturity of your technology organization. Raghu, anything else to add there?
I agree, Sean. I think it has got a lot of dependent factors. Subhendu, if we reply it over the mail, will all the audience get the question and the answer?
Yes, they will.
Okay. So let's do that, because specific tools and continuous testing best practices, we can sort of document them very, very specifically, because there are multiple factors. You will not have a very generic answer otherwise.
That's correct, Raghu. Absolutely. There are quite a lot of questions, very interesting ones.
Let's send them out. Let's send them out.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you, Raghu, thank you, Sean, and thank you so much, everyone, for joining in. I hope you would have absolutely taken some great insights from this session. And sorry, I really apologize that we were short on time. We were not able to cover all of the questions, but we have taken note of all of them. And in case if you have not been able to, or you have any specific questions which you want Sean or Raghu to respond to, drop in a note to marketing@signity.com, and we'd be happy to discuss with the speakers and then come back to you with the responses. So thank you so much once again. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Thanks for joining in. Until next time.
Thank you guys.